What? That's not even a word.
Okay, and that was in German. Okay. The order of perfectibilists, he then changed to the order of the enlightened, which is the Illuminati. See, again, you're playing the same game here. All right, we're the order of the enlightened. Enlightened to what? I've been enlightened. Enlightened to what? What exactly was piece of information that was enlightening? But Weishaupt was very clear about what the goal of his organization was. And the goal of the organization, unabashedly, was world domination.
Great. You're walking us right down the Hitler path. Was Hitler part of the Bavarian Illuminati?
No.
Was he part of a different secret society?
Actually, he was connected to a secret society on the fringes of one thing called the Thule Society.
The
Thule. You see it on ski equipment.
Yes.
Usually we say Thule, but it's Thule. It's referred to a kind of Arctic Atlantis, but that's a rabbit hole we won't jump into now.
Did you just say Arctic Atlantis?
Arctic Atlantis. Yes, an idea of a lost civilization in the Arctic. Why? I don't know.
This is what men did before video games.
Ultima Thule. I'm sure it's in a video game at some point.
And just to clarify for people, this is the same organization that builds the roof racks and...
No. It's not the same organization. Okay.
Just making sure.
A name. There was a legend of some ancient civilization called Ultima Thule.
Yeah, it's a Nordic thing. Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of a Viking Atlantis. It's a very overly simplistic explanation, but
this is a secret occult organization. What does that mean? What does occult mean when I think about secret societies? Are some secret societies occult and others are not? What does occult mean?
What does occult mean? Very simple. It means hidden. Hidden from sight. Always go back to the Latin. So occult means hidden. Well, you go back to the people who invented the word and see what they meant by it, and then it changes over time. But it's always good to figure out what it originally meant and then how it becomes something else. But a cult today, basically, people tend to think of it as diabolical. Again, if you mention the occult, that immediately leads you to what? Satan. Okay? There are those who argue that the devil is always lurking behind everything which is occult, and that's why it's hidden. But all the term really means is that it's hidden. What is hidden? It's a hidden world. So occultism is based, which is the system of manipulating this hidden world, is that we live in a reality which is much bigger than the one that we can see and hear and smell, which is absolutely true. Just ask your dog.
Or any friend who's done mushrooms.
Or any friend who's done mushroom. DMT in particular. DMT. Well, there's a bigger world out there.
They've seen the elves that are running the algorithm.
Right, there you go. They're the ones with the special knowledge.
Okay, so take us back to Hitler's secret society, which it looks like formed at a very interesting time, 1917/1918, which for those of you historians out there was the end of World War I, a very rough time for Germany.
Yes, the war was not going well. It wasn't over yet, but there was a fellow who had been off. Remember I mentioned before about those Masonic lodges in the Balkans that were used to plot revolutions? Well, he was a German, but he was part of that. He was mixed. He was initiated into those very same revolutionary lodges off in the Balkans. And his fellow, you'll love his name. His name was Rudolf von Zebotendorf.
Stop it.
Well, actually, his name was Adam Glauer, but he changed it to Rudolf von Zebotendorf.
I think we're all on DMT right now.
No.
Okay.
This happens. All I do, and in a lot of my research, I'm constantly studying people. And then one of the things you figure out is the name they're known by, that's not their real name.
They have a secret name.
Okay, they have a secret name. So he became Rudolf von Zebotendorf, and he was initiated into about every secret group in the Balkans that existed in the early 20th century.
Everybody wanted him in their secret society.
And then he shows up. He just comes back to Munich in 1917. Why? Nobody's entirely sure. He's also got a lot of money. Where did that money come from? Nobody really knows. They never do they? He's got a lot of money. How many times can you begin this story in different places? A mysterious figure sort of shows up in town. He's got a lot of money and he's got spiritual wisdom to dispense, and he begins to gather a group of people around him.
Hang on. I need to add something about Adam Glauer, Rudolf von Sabetendorf. He was a Freemason, says Wikipedia.
Yes.
He was a Sufi of the Bektashi order. He converted to Islam. He was a practitioner of meditation and then astrology, numerology, alchemy, very important things if you're working on being an occultist. In addition, he worked as a technician in Egypt in the late 1800s. Like, who are these magical people who are forming these secret societies? Also, I'm not skipping over the fact that it says he was a Freemason.
No, what I mentioned, he was initiated into the what were called the sort of Eastern Masonic lodges in what was then the Ottoman Empire and in the Near East. They're all connected to the European lodges, but they were a highly politicized group because if you look at the Balkans or the Near East in this period, there are national movements and revolutions taking place all the time, and they're all basically being organized within Masonic lodges because, as Jonathan noted, they were an excellent cover for that type of activity. So one of the things about Zebotendorf, along with all the mystical doctrines he had absorbed, he'd also gotten a front row seat examination in political conspiracy. That was one of the things. So in involving a mystical group, you could also build a political group. So what happens when he gets back to Munich? He takes over an existing lodge that existed there, which was a thing called the German Order. What a surprise in Germany. The Germanen Orden. For some reason, he decided he wanted to disguise that group behind another name. And he then renamed that group the Thule Gesellschaft, the Thule Society. See, it sounds much more sinister in German, the Thule Gesellschaft. And what they pretended to be, what they were outwardly, were a mystical, an occult study group. They studied German mysticism and folklore, and they met at a fashionable hotel. There was a hotel called the Four Seasons Hotel, and they met there, and outwardly, it appeared to be a bunch of dilettante weirdos. Okay, that's that to the police, it looked like a bunch of weirdos, playing around with tarot cards. I mean, nobody's going to pay much attention to that. But he had other plans, and he's already in connection. He's getting money from some of his activities from who? From the German army. The German army is concerned about, the war's not going that well. There's political unrest. There's Bolshevism, which we also kind of helped start, but now it's kind of coming back on us. And we want some groups that could kind of influence things in society. So what Zebotendorf does is he very carefully begins to create. So he's got his core group, which are the bunch of weirdos at the hotel. And then he begins to create what he calls the Rings of Thule, which are satellite groups that are sort of wholly owned subsidiaries of the society, but separate from it.
Like it's a franchise.
A franchise. And one of the things we need to do, he decides, is that with this growing threat of Bolshevism and communism, who does that appeal to? It appeals to the workers. So the workers are kind of pissed off. So we need to have a group that will appeal to the workers to keep them away from the commies. And what we need to do in this is not to create something which is anti-communist. We need to create something which is counter-communist. That is a form of communism. So this is a difficult concept in some way, but the idea is that in anti-communism, you simply oppose everything that communists stand for. In counter-communism, you basically approve everything communists stand for, but you do it under different terms. You don't call it communism, you call it National Socialism. I wonder why that term came in? But what he eventually creates is one of his spin-off groups is a thing called the German Workers' Party. It sounds, that sounds pretty pinko. German Workers' Party. So if you were going, I don't know, if you were a disgruntled worker and you're thinking about, I don't know, should I join the Bolsheviks? Well, there's this other thing called the German Workers' Party. And they stand for everything the commies do, but they also say that they're patriotic and mystical. So maybe I should check them out. So the German Workers' Party which will, a year down the road, change its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. So the Nazi Party is a direct evolution of this spin-off of the Thule Society. And that is the group which Adolf Hitler in 1919 is sent by the army to infiltrate. And he attends when he goes to the first meeting that he attends, the German Workers' Party, he listens to a lecture. And that lecture is titled, How and Why Capitalism is to be Destroyed. So if you were kind of inclined towards communism or thought Bolshevism sounded attractive, now you've got this other group which is kind of selling you the same thing, but with a different agenda overall. That is to create a kind of parallel communism that will then be guided towards pay. Now, why was Hitler sent into this group? Because the German army had trained him as a propagandist. That was the first real job he ever had. So when the war is over, you often get this idea that Hitler is he's just one of these discharged veterans wandering around the country. No, he doesn't leave the army. He doesn't leave the army until 1921. He's still getting a paycheck from the army. And they bring him in. One of his superior officers, a fellow by the name of Karl Mayr, who once described Hitler as a dog looking for a master, decided to become his master. And he decided, this guy he has speaking ability, and therefore he has the potential to have influence over other soldiers. So we're going to take him in, and we're going to train him in terms of how to give pep talks and speeches. Also, how to become a spy, to ferret out if there are any commies among the soldiers. And then once he's trained, we're going to actually, they really don't send him into the German Workers' Party to spy on it. That's the way it's written about it. They send him in, take over the leadership of it. And when Hitler shows up and becomes a prominent figure, Zebotendorf is cast aside. He leaves. His job has been accomplished. He sort of started this group, and now there's another fellow who is sent in to manage it.
The question is then, are secret societies breeding grounds for training a type of leadership that we should be afraid of?
But the tool can be used for good or evil, right? Like they trained him to have influence, and it was only, didn't say what the influence should necessarily be. It's the philosophy of the guiding organization that's then going to drive what the influence is. So we should be more concerned about what the philosophy of these guiding organizations are. And for the most part, those are the parts of the secret society that are kept the most secret.
But the guiding hand in this is the army. That's it. It's the remnants of the German general staff in the post-war era that wanted to keep itself around and continue to have influence. So when you're looking at the Thule Society and you focus on that, you're looking at the wrong thing. Your attention is being diverted because the people who are actually pulling the strings on the whole thing, who are paying for this, who are training Hitler to be a propagandist, who funded the creation of the German Workers' Party, who probably were paying for everything Zebotendorf did, is the army, because they wished to maintain social influence and control and thereafter. And then trace it all the way through. Who eventually makes Hitler Chancellor of Germany? The army. The guy who will anoint him with that office is Paul von Hindenburg. The German army in the Weimar period was constantly struggling to maintain its old, what it felt was its rightful position in society, and who, of course, desperately wanted to eventually rearm and refight that war again and win it. We're looking for someone who could fulfill that purpose and could play the role which they couldn't do because they were generally soldiers and aristocrats. They're not politicians. What they needed to do was to create a politician that would serve their interests. And in the case of Hitler, that's what they thought they had done. In the process of that, though, they made the classical mistake that so many human beings do when they plot and plan. You create what you think is a servant, which will become your master. They created someone who they thought would be a tool which they could use, and that tool eventually overpowers them. They lose control. It's Frankenstein, or if you prefer, Frankenstein. Or Frankenstein. It's you've now created a thing which is supposed to do your bidding, like AI, but which will then begin to think on its own.
Interesting to find someone with this great capability to influence people and then training him, giving him the opportunities to practice that skill set, and then that getting away from them in that way.
You came to this idea, are secret societies inherently dangerous because they can do things behind a veil of secrecy? They can be. I mean, most of them, frankly, are innocuous. Nothing really happens. And if you knew what the secrets were, they really wouldn't be that interesting. But it is what other purposes those things, and what purpose a group of like-minded people joined together in an atmosphere of specialness and secrecy, what kind of other things can those be turned to? So it can become dangerous, or it can become nothing. It all comes down to the intention.